Greetings, classicists, and welcome to our first lesson on the Persians. So, remember you have read it for the holiday work, so you should have an intimate, detailed, and complete knowledge of the whole play, possibly. Well, anyway, you should have read it, you should have answered the question, so you should have a reasonable understanding of what's going on. Nonetheless, we're still going to go through it in order and picking out some of the key passages and scenes and so on as normal. So do take notes as we go. Right. So let's just drift back to the context of the Persians and, of course, all of the other plays that we look at, especially Medea. And this is really important for understanding the impact that the plays would have had, because it's not, as we've talked about before, just rocking up to the theatre on a Wednesday night as part of a social experience. It is an extremely social experience, the theatre in the Greek world, but there is so much more to it than that. Plays take part, or are part of, rather, sorry, plays are part of a festival called the Dionysia, the Greater Dionysia, and this is a festival that's fundamental to Athenian identity, and a lot goes on there. It isn't just going to see one single play. So let's look at the structure of the Greater Dionysia. So it's split up over 5 days, and we'll have a little bit of a look at what happens in each day, because the thing that we're really trying to convey is what's going on behind the scenes. You know, when an Athenian sits down to watch a tragedy, so much has already happened before. So much is going to happen afterwards. You can't really look at one play in isolation, especially when you're trying to explore its impact on an Athenian audience. So the Greater Dionysia is split into 5 days. Day 1, you've got a series of processions, and we'll look at that in a little bit, where they go and get the cult statue of Dionysus. Days 2, 3, and 4 are when the tragedies take place. So each tragedian has 1 day, and they produce 3 tragedies and a satyr play following it. And then possibly in the afternoon after that, you have some of the individual comedies. So these are not written by tragedians. These are a separate little thing. Initially not very well respected, but actually they go on to become really quite important, but we don't really cover them in the course, so don't worry too much about those. And then day 5, you've got even more choral competitions and a decision as to who is the victor, because remember, it's a competition as much as a religious, political, social festival. So let us have a look at day 1. So day 1 starts with the Pompey, which is a procession to the theatre of Dionysus, and this includes as many citizens as possible, the chorus, probably all dressed up, the choregos, who is the person who's paid for the festival and for the plays, and you'd have different choregos who support different sort of playwrights. Maybe even women took part in the Pompey, maybe even citizen women. We're not sure. There would have been metics and representatives of colonies. So the metics are kind of resident foreigners in Athens, and Athenians who'd gone on to work in colonies or found colonies, would have taken part. So it would have been a real festival of kind of Athenianness and Athenian unity. The crowd would be carrying the statue of Dionysus. They'd be carrying these giant phalluses. Remember, Herodotus talks about them in his section on the Egyptians and how the Athenians learnt this from the Egyptians. There would have been ritualistic shouting and insults, and it would have been a very, very strange, very unusual, peculiar procession from our point of view. But it is a religious procession, and it is about getting the statue of Dionysus, the cult statue of Dionysus, from the temple of Dionysus to the center of the theatre in Athens itself. So we've got already we've got this religious festival, this religious procession, this quite extreme, chaotic, wild religious environment, and this is in the first day before we've even seen a play. So imagine what you'll be feeling as an Athenian when you're in the sort of fourth day and you're watching your sort of seventh or eighth play. You've got this real kind of conditioning of religion and democracy and civic involvement. It's not just going to see one play once and then going and having supper afterwards, or finish work early, go and watch a play, as I'm sure you will do. That's how the theatre may happen for us now, or the cinema, or something equivalent, but it's really not like that for the Athenians. And this is really important to understand when you're exploring the impact of these plays, and that's obviously going to be a sort of critical question in the exam. Why does this one line or scene with a character, why might it have such a powerful effect on the audience? Well, you need to understand the context in order to be able to make those judgments. So after the procession has gone to get this statue of Dionysus, we then have the chorus competition, or one of the chorus competitions. And there are choruses from the 10 Athenian tribes who compete with each other. So it's an interesting sort of, not quite paradox, but you've got unity of being in a chorus, but also an element of sort of competition with other parts of the city. And that is really how Athens works, unity and competition. And this is very much separate to the tragic, or the competition of tragedies that happens in the next 2 or 3 days. So again, we've got a reinforcement of a lot of core Athenian values, democracy, unity, working as a group, the kind of the political organization of the tribes that are different to the deme. So Athens' sort of social organization is a little bit complicated. We're not going to go into it particularly, but again, just remember the sort of social structure of Athenian society is reinforced by this chorus competition. Now, after this chorus competition, you've got a more extreme sort of drunken party procession, and this is the wild drunken party that spills throughout Athens. The participants wore masks, which is quite interesting because that disassociates themselves from their behaviour, and it's why the actors wear masks. Remember, if they say or do something hubristic, if they're wearing a mask, it's not them, it's the character they're representing. And this kind of disassociation from behaviour is probably something that's going on with the masks that people wear in this procession. The chorus take part, and it's the festival of Dionysus, so no doubt absolutely loaded with sex and drinking. And I think it's probably quite unlikely that citizen wives would have taken part in this, but remember, Athens is absolutely full of prostitutes. That's a sort of core part of Athenian culture, and I've no doubt that they would have been a sort of fundamental part of this drunken party procession. So day one, imagine you're watching Aeschylus the next day. You've had this huge sort of drunken party, this reinforcement of religion, of politics, of culture, of Athenianness, sex, drink. You're not just going into the play, the Persians, which we'll have a look at in a bit, sort of just almost out of nowhere. There's a really big, powerful sort of cultural build-up to it. Now, days 2, 3, and 4 are when the tragedies take place. So on the first day, you've got the election of the play judges, you've got civic announcements, and you've got displays of wealth. So again, you're just being reminded. So in terms of the election of the play judges, again, we're seeing an election, we're seeing democracy, we're seeing the power of the people, and this is important because the playwrights are obviously writing to win, so they need to kind of tap into what appeals to an Athenian audience. The civic announcements, important things that are going to happen with the city, important notices, important expressions of events, and so on and so forth, remind you that this is a sort of a political festival that reinforces your identity as a member of the polis. So I suppose I don't know if it's a very good equivalent, but it used to be in the cinema, and it is in some countries. before you watch a film, the national anthem's played, and everyone has to stand to attention. That was the case in Thailand. I don't know, when I went to Thailand. Everyone, we were sitting watching a film, and before the film starts, everyone in the theatre stands up. The national anthem's played, and then everyone sits down again. So a real reinforcement of sort of civic identity. So when you're watching a play that challenges your civic identity or is always very different to your civic identity, this has been, this is a really clear kind of reinforcement, if you like. So over days 2, 3, and 4, we've got our tragedies. So one playwright will have one day where they perform 3 tragedies, or rather they write and manage 3 tragedies and a satyr play. The satyr play is that sort of wild, extravagant, slapstick, highly sexual, sort of ridiculous comedic cleansing of the palate after 3 probably quite harrowing tragedies. So Aeschylus would have done 3 tragedies and a satyr play on a Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever, and then someone else would have done it the next day and someone else the day after. In the afternoon, there was probably some comedy. The precise timing of the comedy and the nature of the comedy is a little bit less clear and not really very relevant to our course, so don't worry too much. But to have a general understanding of Greek theatre, there are also these comedic plays which are different to the satyr plays, and they become really quite important and famous later on, not so much at the time of Aeschylus. Now in day 5, we have again more chorus competitions. The men's chorus, the boys' chorus, you've got the judgment of who wins, who is the greatest playwright, and then you've got the final procession. So this is all really important to understand. So when an Athenian is sitting down watching the Persians, the play that we study in great depth, or indeed Medea, the play that we've already studied, there's so much going on. There's been so much reinforcement of identity. They're already very preloaded, emotional, possibly hungover. They've been guided into really considering the nature of being an Athenian, being a citizen, possibly being a male, being a warrior. All sorts of things would have been already sort of laid bare and reinforced for them before they sat down to watch a trilogy of plays. So some really important historical context. So this play, the Persians that we're going to study, was first produced in 472 BC. So this is only 7 years, slightly less than 7 years after the Battle of Plataea. And remember, at around just before the Battle of Plataea, the Persians burnt Athens for a second time. So Athens, after being attacked twice and burnt twice by the Persians, would have been in a terrible state. And how much building would have been done, 7 years later. I think it would have been a city very much still under construction, very much covered in the scars of war. 479 wasn't the end of the war by any means. It was obviously a great victory, Plataea, that drove the Persians out, but I think the scars would have still been very visible, the physical scars very visible to the Athenians. So when you're watching this play about Persians, you're sitting in the city where you can see the damage that the Persians have caused. So that would have, I think, created a very strong reaction. Another thing, Salamis, where the Athenians won this great battle, and that was the battle in which the Athenians are arguably the kind of dominant force, is visible from the theatre. So you can see the place where the crucial battle that liberated Greece took place. And the reality is that a huge number of the audience would have taken part in that battle. So you're sitting in your city that the Persians have burnt twice. You can see the place where you fought. The wooden benches that you're sitting on may well have come from Persian ships, that had been washed up on the shore and broken up because Athens would have been desperate for the wood. So you could be sitting on Persian ships in a sort of semi-burnt out Athens, and you would have been sitting in your demes. Now remember, demes are a sort of political but also military way of organizing. So you could be sitting with the person who, sitting next to the person who you stand next to in, the hoplite phalanx, or maybe someone who you row with on a boat. So there is a lot of really important physical context to watching a play like the Persians. Again, it's not just something that kind of comes out of nowhere. When a Persian first walks on the stage, think about the very visceral, real response that many of the audience would have felt, or would have given. It's it's a like a war veteran watching a film in the cinema about the war that they took part in, but times 10, I would guess. Now, the other important piece of historical context is that this play was put on when, or just after Athens had formed what was called the Delian League. And this league was an anti-Persian league, but it very, very quickly, almost from the beginning, became an Athenian empire, because the Athenians basically said to all of these places, not necessarily unreasonably, if our navy is keeping you free from the Persians, you need to contribute to its upkeep, otherwise it'll bankrupt us. You can either give us ships and join in this big anti-Persian navy, or you can give us money. And a lot of places thought, well, we'll just give the Athenians money. That's much easier. So then very quickly it really becomes this sort of empire with a system of tribute, and Athens going from being this great liberator, one could argue, actually becomes an enslaver of Greeks. So that's important to understand when we're trying to pick out the message of the Persians. Yes, obviously the Greeks versus barbarians, a lot of the sort of stereotypical ideas that we've been thinking through are probably the direction to explore, but there could also be a more general warning about the dangers of imperialism and empire in the story, the Persians. Obviously the Persians are being sort of mocked at, warned, if you like, but maybe the Athenians are too by Aeschylus. Maybe he's saying, look, this is what happened to the last great arrogant empire. Don't do the same thing with the Delian League. So some crucial, again, historical context. And remember, what's driving and motivating Aeschylus? The experiences that he's had with the Persians. And again, the reason why this is important is because you may get a question, to what extent is Aeschylus showing sympathy for the Persians? Not an easy one to answer, but I think, again, it's important to remind yourself, Aeschylus fought against the Persians at Marathon, and what he wanted on his tombstone was that he had fought there and he had fought bravely, and the long-haired Medes know it well. So, the Persians are aware of his bravery because of the way that he fought at Marathon. Nothing mentioned about his plays. So, if these are the things that motivate Aeschylus, is he likely to be that sympathetic towards the Persians? You can certainly argue either way. So, what would the Athenian audience be thinking and feeling before the play had even started? So, try and identify 10 ideas and explain their significance. So again, just think back to all the things we've talked about, talk through, try and build up this kind of picture of what it would be like for an Athenian sitting down to watch the Persians. So that should take 10 minutes. Try and be as clear and precise and specific as possible. So stop the video and have a crack at that. So the next thing that we need to understand in a contextual sense is, certainly for this play and Medea as well, is semiotics. So semiotics in theatre. What is semiotics, I hear you ask? Well, it is a exotic sounding word for something relatively simple. And semiotics are basically, or semiotics is rather, the study of signs and symbols and how they're used in a very simple sense, but it could be viewed in a more complex way. So semiotics is the general philosophical theory of signs and symbols, especially dealing with their function in artificial and natural languages, blah, 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 blah. So really it's the what do signs mean and why. So it's a slightly sort of fancy, complex word, if you like, but it is quite useful to understand what it really means. So a good example of semiotics we will see on the next slide. So what can we learn from all of the symbols in this picture? Now, it doesn't matter necessarily the specifics or the details, but there is a huge amount that is communicated to us via the signs and symbols in this picture. And the reason why we're looking at this is because the same would be true of an Athenian audience as well. And these are the sorts of things that we don't necessarily pick up on when we're just looking at the text of Aeschylus and even Euripides' Medea. There is so much going on that could be hinted at through the language, but that could also be transmitted through costume, motion, stance, music, all of these sorts of things that would again have had a really powerful impact on an audience. And this builds on the there we go, some the semiotics of building, and this is obviously added to the the sort of context of the Dionysia as well. So have a look, just jot down as many ideas as you possibly can. Stop it for 3 or 4 minutes. So let's have a look. Let's see if this tool thing works. So, imagine if you were an alien or someone very, very unfamiliar with any of the signs or symbols in this picture. You wouldn't really have a clue what was going on. But for us, because of our cultural understanding of what's going on, and I know most of you won't really have much of an understanding of the military, but that won't necessarily stop you understanding a lot of the signs. So, for example, we can see here these medals on the individual's chests. They show bravery. They are awards for acting in a brave and disciplined fashion. So someone from a completely different culture or an alien wouldn't understand that. Yet that is quite a powerful symbol, and we could possibly even put them into some kind of hierarchy based on that. So this guy's got lots of medals, this guy's got a similar amount of medals, this guy's only got a few. So we would understand that this guy is more brave or braver, and his bravery has been celebrated by the organization that he is a part of. So again, think about the equivalent in theatre. There could just be some little mark on a sleeve or a piece of jewelry or an item of clothing that transmits a huge amount of significance that we may not necessarily have got from the script. Again, look at these red sashes. So you see these two have got these red sashes, the others don't. That obviously makes them stand out, probably as someone more important. In another context, having a red sash could mean that you were a slave or marked for execution, or it could have all sorts of meanings. But we, even with a sort of very general understanding of the army and what it is, you can probably work all of these things out, even if you don't know the specific details. I'm sure none of you know what all these medals are. If you look at their arms, you can see they've got their insignia of rank. And again, I'm sure you don't know what all those individual ranks are, but you know that they are ranks. You know that there is some kind of hierarchy of control. You know that these guys with their 3 stripes are more important than the guys with the 1 stripes. You know that because they're all wearing the same uniform, there is some and the same sort of cap badges and the same berets. You know that they are part of the same unit. So again, we've got this sense of unity and discipline and order, and I'm sure there'll be all sorts of signs that are transmitted in the performance of Aeschylus that we wouldn't necessarily be able to pick up on, that would be very specific to an Athenian audience. Other signs, look, this guy's got wearing white gloves, this guy's not wearing gloves, and none of the others are wearing gloves too. This guy is at the front of this long line. and he's presenting this guy with something, which again would suggest this guy has a significant status within the hierarchy. So, and you know, we could go on and on with this picture if we wanted to. But the point that we're trying to make is that even the smallest little symbol or, you know, facial expression or piece of headdress or jewelry or something along those lines in a specific cultural context can carry a huge amount of weight, a huge amount of power, and can really tell a really important story to the audience. Some of these things we'll be able to pick up on. Others may just well be lost because we don't have stage directions. We don't know precisely what people wore during the performance. And again, this is all true for Medea as well. Is she moving in a certain way? Is she dressed in a certain way? Does she speak with a certain accent? Has she got a particular piece of jewelry or you know, facial tattoo or or a mannerism that is particularly barbaric? Again, we can make some guesses, we can make some assumptions, but we will never know the full picture. But it's always worth bearing this in mind. So a good person to sort of refer to when we're looking at semiotics is Rosie Wiles, and basically she says semiotic analysis is the idea that everything is placed there, every sign or symbol is placed there deliberately in tragedy to communicate something to the audience. So not philosophically complicated, but an interesting idea as well. So you can refer to Rosie Wiles and, you know, theatre semiotics, you know, the fact that a character does something or wears something is deliberate and is communicating a potentially powerful cultural message. So just as a quick kind of example, and it's a bit silly, but hopefully we'll get the point across. You know, if the play reads, "The cowboy walked into the room," from this sentence, what do we actually know about the cowboy, the scene, the proposed audience? Arguably not very much. So this may be what we've got on the text. But then if you see the person in reality, then that tells you a very, very different story. So the cowboy walked into the room. This could be the start of a really tense shootout. Yeah, you know, if you see this cowboy walking into a room, Clint Eastwood, you know someone is going to die. On the other hand, this cowboy walks into a room, you know that we're in a sporting event. You know, with that ridiculous helmet, you know that he is a fan, you know, probably a super fan, maybe, who knows. But anyway, still the cowboy walks into the room, but we've got a very different kind of context created by dress. Again, the cowboy walked into the room. Well, you know, here you've got a sort of, is it not really cyberpunk, is it? Anyway, cyber cowboys, probably not even a thing, but you know what I mean. So now we know, even though the cowboys walked into the room, a completely different context, and dragging it back to the ancient world, one of these cowboys or cowgirls walking into a room, again, you know, a completely different context. So just because the text reads, "The cowboy walked into the room," the actions that they take, what they're wearing, can really transform the way the audience understand them. So we need to have a real understanding of the sort of cultural awareness of our Athenian audience, both for Medea and for the Persians. So in the Persians, there's a couple of really key signs and symbols that we need to keep an eye out for, as highlighted by these three pictures. So if you have a look up on the left, you've got the bow. So the bow, archery, also soft furnishings, that's for a house, but, you know, soft clothing, patterned clothing, and this idea of them moving and running in a light way. Remember what the symbol of the bow is. It is a symbol of Persian royalty. It's something that the Greeks were aware of and used in a hunting context, even a military context sometimes. But fundamentally, it is in comparison to the hoplite phalanx or the trireme, it is a sign of effeminacy, weakness, fighting from a distance. This sign in the middle, the chariot, the gold chariot, here we've got, again, a very powerful sign or symbol to an Athenian audience. If someone shows up in a chariot, it shows that they are very much outdated, especially if they're going to war. If they're using it to travel around in, it shows a real sense that they are of a very high, inappropriate status. So when we see a tosser appearing on stage in a chariot, this is a crazy thing. Why on earth have you got a chariot outside of chariot races? This is exotic. This is peculiar. This is a very archaic thing to be traveling around in. The other really powerful visual sign would be the chorus kowtowing to the spirit of Darius. And remember, this is again a really, really powerful visual signal for the Athenians. They do not do this other than to gods. Remember, the Spartans would rather, in Herodotus, Sperthias and Bulis said they'd rather die than do this in front of Xerxes, and the Athenians would have felt very similarly. So these are some of the really powerful visual symbols that would have shocked the Athenian audience that doesn't necessarily come across completely from the reading of the play. And there are certainly more semiotics, there are more signs in there as well. So just keep an eye out for how these things would have been viewed by the Athenians. So another thing to consider, to think about, is this idea of Orientalism, and that is depictions of the East. Now, Aeschylus is arguably one of the first authors to try and develop an idea of, the Easterners as this kind of this big blobby mass of other. Now, creating a sort of sense of other is quite useful, can be really useful for defining yourself. So group identity is created and reinforced through kind of common values, common things that you are, but it's also very effectively created by common things that you are not. So just try this as an activity. Choose a group that you belong to, see if you can list 2 we are ideas and 2 we are not ideas, and then have a look and so we do or we don't, we are or we are not. Have a think about which idea is more powerful, because often you'll find it's the we are not, we don't do this particular thing, can be a really sort of powerful signifier of a group. So just trying to think of an example off the top of my head, maybe something like politics. We all sort of have a belief in a democratic political system. Everybody's political beliefs are a little bit different. Even if you all vote for one particular party, your beliefs within that party, the things that are more important to you, are still probably really quite different. So, in a political sense, what holds people from Britain together? There's all these different parties. There's quite a strong feeling of animosity between the parties. Within the parties, there's strong feelings of animosity. So what's the common ground? What holds everyone together? Well, sometimes that can be, a dictatorship, or a place that has no elections or no democracy, or political parties are banned. So you look at this other place and there are no political parties, and you go, oh, right, okay, we may have not much political ideals in common, but we all believe that political parties should exist. We all believe that elections should happen. These are the kind of and these ideas are brought forth by seeing that it doesn't happen somewhere else. So that, and the same be said for the Greeks and the barbarians. So there are so many different flavors of Greek, if you like, but yet they have all these common things that they don't do. We don't worship people as if they're gods. We don't let women enter politics. We don't use the bow as a sort of primary weapon of war. So just an interesting thing to think about. Now, very common depictions of the East and Easterners, especially with regard to Orientalism as a broader concept, because Orientalism goes beyond Aeschylus and is a way that the West has viewed the East for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And you'll see that it's actually quite a common theme. The Greeks viewed the Persians the Eastern barbarians in this way. The Crusaders viewed the Byzantine Greeks, who were Eastern as far as they were concerned, and the Muslims, who were very Eastern as far as they were concerned. They viewed them as having these characteristics by and large. The sort of post-Crusades, the Ottoman Empire, the empire fundamentally based on Turkey and expanded into Europe and throughout the Middle East. Again, these were the sort of views that the West had of the East. So it's interesting how they may have been started by Aeschylus and stayed with us even till relatively recently, and some could argue they even exist today in depictions of China or Japan. So these ideas are that the Orientals, the Easterners, are irrational. They don't have the same cool, calm, logical approach, and we certainly see this with Xerxes in Herodotus and in Aeschylus. They're morally corrupt, so they don't have that kind of core of good morals that the West has. They are effeminate, be that in the way they fight, be that in an obsession with sex and luxury. They're cowardly and subservient, so they are not great at war, and they are easily dominated by someone of greater strength, and that's why they have these tyrannical political systems. And again, you see this in Orientalism as an idea in all sorts of depictions of the East throughout the ages. The dominant sultan, the grand vizier, the decadent Chinese emperor. It's quite a kind of, these ideas are quite powerful sort of Western stereotypes of the East, and they may have even started in Aeschylus and around this time, and that's one of the reasons why we're sort of doing this course. To what extent are these ideas a result of the Greco-Persian conflict? Are we seeing this kind of strand through history? Possibly. The other thing to remember with these Oriental cultures, these Eastern cultures, is that they're decadent rather than primitive. Remember, for the Greeks, you've got barbarians all over the place. When you look to the West, which would be modern France and Britain, they're primitive. Savages with no clothes on, violence, no laws, no systems, no leaders. Just anarchy. When you look to the East, it's a civilization gone wrong. They've got luxury and food and roads and government and all this sort of stuff, but it's been twisted, it's been corrupted to a kind of negative end rather than a positive one. And again, those are things that we've seen as Western depictions of the East throughout time. Anyway, a bit of a sidetrack, but I think it's important to understand the cultural relevance of why we study this course. So here we see a classic example of Orientalism. So this is a picture by Jerome, and this is called Pool in a Harem from 1876. And here we can see a lot of those ideas put forward. We've got the harem, which is the sort of sexual sorry, a room full of women for the sort of sole use of a sultan or powerful individual. And you can see that it's a highly sexual image. There's a real kind of emphasis on the sexuality of women. There's a real emphasis on luxury. They're in a bath. They're lounging around on soft furnishings. They are themselves slaves. They're all there for the pleasure of one man who can't control himself. He's got to have so many different women. You can see the one of the women is handing round tobacco or possibly something even more exotic. So there's drugs and luxury and excess and subservience. So all of these ideals would have been recognized by Aeschylus, and here we see them 2,000 years later in depictions of the East. So what else do we see? Well, we see a lot of femininity and immaturity as a concept, and this is a really important one to understand. Atossa is on stage more than anyone else. So the star, if you like, of the Persians is a woman. And Persia can be viewed as a paradigm of the feminine. Persia is femininity, and their actions, values, and behavior reflect those of the female. Now, within this, we see a constant reference to Persian marriage beds, which are empty, and young Persian women constantly weeping. So how does this image of the Persians compare to Greek or Athenian self-image? So we've got these soft, sensual, feminine Persians, and then we look at the Greeks, and as far as they're concerned, this is them, and this is demonstrated by the Riace bronzes, which are two very impressive statues. And again, these aren't going to be set images, but stop this, jot down a few ideas. How do these images depict a kind of stereotypical understanding of the Greeks? So how do they show you, or how do they push or emphasize Greek values? So stop 3 minutes and jot down as many ideas as you can. Good. So as always, we've got heroic nudity, we've got muscles, we've got which is discipline, which is blessed by the gods. You've got the small genitalia, which shows restraint. You've got the beards, which again show just that bit of masculinity. Not that you would necessarily know, but hopefully you can see that they're holding spears, or they would have been holding spears, possibly shields in the other hand. So again, they would have been they would have got the weapons of the hoplite in the phalanx and everything that goes with that. One of them, you can see he's got a kind of domed head. That's because there was a helmet that appeared kind of on his head that's been lost in the fullness of time. So again, you've got the way they fight, the way they exercise sexual restraint, Andrea masculinity. So let us make a start on the play. So you should have read it. We're just going to pick out some of the key quotes, key ideas, key things, and again, do take down notes. So the play starts with the chorus. Now the chorus are very interesting because they appear and they set the scene, and they help define the nature of Persians. Remember, they're always on stage, and they are really powerful in depicting Aeschylus's and the Athenians' understanding of what it means to be Persian. So important things to note: they're old and weak. So most of the Persians that we see on stage are old and weak and feeble and not in their physical prime, unlike the Greeks. They're chosen, not elected. So this would have been a significant issue for the Athenians. Age and wealth was key to their selection. So it's not that they were voted in, it's not that they were the best men for the job, it's that they were old and wealthy. So again, the antithesis of democracy. They're completely subservient. They do what they're told all the time. They have no real drive or motivation or power of their own. They're also ignorant and afraid. They don't know what's going on. They don't know how to read the signs of the gods. They're terrified of everything. And they're so afraid they allow themselves to be led by a woman and then a ghost. There is no kind of real masculinity to the chorus, to these characters. And in the end, we see them mourning in a very feminine way, tearing of clothes and wailing. Obviously an Eastern way, but a very feminine way as far as the Greeks are concerned. So how could staging alter or enhance these characteristics? So think about the mask, think about the dress, think about movement. What could the chorus do that would really emphasize these characteristics and create a really powerful kind of visual reinforcement of what is going on? So see if you can come up with a couple of ideas for each one. So 10 points. So stop this for 5 minutes, fire out 10 points. Good. So let's have a look at the play. So we'll just do the first sort of 3 or 4 pages. Now here the play starts with the chorus in Susa, the Persian capital, and think about the background. There would have been Xerxes' tomb in the foreground, and maybe some kind of palace in the background. It could have been rich, it could have been exotic, it could have been really kind of out of control in terms of gold and foreignness from a Greek perspective. So they start off by talking about who they are, the fact they've been left to guard this rich and golden house. So we've got this Persian emphasis on wealth and luxury. They talk about how they've been chosen on the basis of rank and years. So again, a non-democratic appointment to control this vast state. Xerxes has just gone, oh yeah, someone better look after this. You're old and rich, you do it. So this is the very opposite of Athenian democracy, where people are put in for very strict term limits, they're elected, and there's a very complex democratic system that allows you to run Athens for a very focused period of time. Completely the opposite in Persia. They talk about, as the play goes on, they talk about Xerxes' gold-clad armament. Now this is an interesting point, because with armor made of gold, we get to see a lot about Xerxes. Gold would be useless, really, as any kind of proper armor. So the fact that Xerxes has got gold armor shows that he's not really fighting. This isn't a practical thing. It's also a very ridiculous thing to take into battle, gold armor. Why would you bother? So we see that Xerxes is not standing in the front of the phalanx like a Greek general, Greek leader should. He's prancing around at the back, and we know he's on a throne in gold show armor. And the chorus then express their concern for the flower of Asian youth. And so this is a beginning of a kind of repetition of all sorts of ideas of softness, maybe a bit of innocence, immaturity, the flower of Asian youth. This is not a series of gritty, hardened warriors marching off to battle. This is the flower of youth. It's images of beauty and softness and luxury rather than manliness. The chorus then go on to talk about why they're upset. They don't know where the army is. They're missing it. What's going on? They're nervous. And they describe the army's departure. They say the Persian force flowed westwards. Now, this is important because this idea of the force as water is quite a powerful image. So you've got water, an uncountable mass that sort of pours around everything. It's very hard to contain, very hard to stop. This idea of the Persian force flowing and these references to the barbarian army as liquid, I think, are really powerful, very powerful imagery. The chorus then go on to name some individuals, and this would have had quite a significant impact because, first of all, they're really exotic, strange, un-Greek names. So you could do the same thing. If someone lists off some French names, if you said Pierre, Jean-Claude, and I don't know, running out of French names, but just those two names, most people would instantly go, okay, French, and then whatever associations there are with French. So we're getting this, these barbaric, exotic, strange names, maybe pronounced in outrageous and strange fashion. They're also interestingly individualized. So we've had this flowing mass of Persians, and now we're getting down into some individual details. And that might have a couple of interesting effects. So first of all, it might create some sympathy for the Persians, because we're not just seeing numberless masses dying, we're seeing individuals, we're seeing real people die. On the other hand, that could be a sort of real reinforcement of a sort of celebration of defeat. So we killed the Persians, we killed their vast numbers, but we killed these individuals too. If you look at any war film or horror film, yes, there'll be, that zombie horror film, there'll be moments where heroes are killing, hundreds of zombies or thousands of zombies, or the enemy, but there'll also be up close and personal moments where there's a one-on-one fight that really emphasizes the strength of the hero. The Persians are also called masters of bow and bridle. So again, the reinforcement of bow symbolism. We're also told that particular Persians are riding 4-horse chariots. Now, this is a very exotic, ridiculous weapon that should not be used to go to war. This is great for racing, hobbies, but it's odd. It's not appropriate. It's not a decent thing to go to war in. So the fact that you've got Persians charging around in 4-horse chariots is just excessive ridiculousness. Then we see a different type of warrior, the numberless marsh dwellers. So we've got some Persians charging around in chariots, some numberless marsh dwellers, are really quite primitive, exotic and strange. And we're getting this sense of a huge army. The whole of Asia has been emptied and sent to Greece, which again reinforces the hubris of Xerxes. Other important descriptions include the soft-skinned Lydians. So we've got the mention of a different people who make up this barbarian army, and again this reference to softness. Think back again to the flower of youth and their love of gold and luxury. Now they make it clear what their aims are, and motivations are important. So their aim is to cast down proud Hellas. They're marching to invade Greece to enslave the Greeks. That's one of their motivations. The other motivation is made clear later on, because they obey the king's dread word. So they do what they're told because they're afraid of Xerxes, unlike the Greeks who are motivated by freedom. So you've got this huge army from all sorts of different places, with soft skins, silly weaponry. They can barely communicate with each other. They're there to enslave Greece, but they themselves are slaves. They fear the king's dread word. And then we get a reference to numbers, 1,000,000 sabres. So this is an army of 1,000,000 men, and think about size and scale and all of the issues that conveys with hubris and organisation and so on and so forth. When the chorus then start talking about Xerxes, they really highlight some of his essential characteristics. So he yoked the sea's neck. So remember the bridge at the Hellespont, and all of the issues that are associated with that. That is the ultimate in hubris. The sea is a channel, and he has enslaved a god. It just doesn't get more hubristic than that. And that goes with, and all of this is attached to all of the other analysis that we've done on Herodotus, and this scene. It's hubristic, it's ridiculous. He's turning sea into land, and then land into sea with the canal later on. So I think all of the analysis that we did for that is applicable to this as well. The chorus then go on to describe this army as a myriad flock, and this is an interesting choice of words. If you're describing a group of soldiers in a positive sense, you'd want them to be maybe a pack, like a pack of wolves. Yet they're described as a flock. What animals flock? Well, birds and sheep. So probably others too. Any other flocks? Flock of goats? No, that's a herd. Flock of Siamese cats? No, they don't have the organisation for it. Anyway, again, interesting imagery and language. And then the chorus go on to reveal that they believe that Xerxes is himself the peer of gods. So he is equal to the gods. Well, this would have just shocked the Greeks. What an absurd, ridiculous and insane almost thing for the chorus to say. So last thing, which you may well not have time to do, because I think this is quite a long one. But anyway, quickly plan this 10-mark question based on these kind of key ideas. How effectively does Aeschylus characterise the Persian army in lines 1 to 75? Can you come up with a couple of quotes on size and origin, a couple of quotes on unity, effeminacy, leadership and subservience, motivation? So, using that as a bit of a structure, 2 examples for each, that should only take you 4 or 5 minutes. Good, okay, well done. Quite a long one, lots to get down, but hopefully we're reminding you of stuff, we're going over old values, so hopefully it's not too much to absorb. Anyway, I will catch up with you in class later on.